think most insurance companies know if we do not get on this train, we will not be here. In a couple of years, right? Because it will be a game changer. If you miss that boat, you will potentially fall behind the pack and then eventually be irrelevant. You can have as much data as you want. If the people don't trust it and don't use it, it's worthless. If I can't see the impact on the top or bottom line, then I haven't been able to scale it. Push yourself out of your comfort zone. Volunteer for the work no one wants to do. They have a reputation of doing the stuff no one else wants to do, and they've been successful at it.
Hi everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Data Innovators and Builders. This is Saket, and today I'm speaking with Yorck Einhaus. Yorck was formerly the CDO at Liberty Mutual and Farmers. Yorck, great to have you here.
Nice for having me. Thank you.
Yorck, let's start a little bit with your background and your work in the data space.
Yeah, so it's probably a little unconventional. First of all, I'm born and raised in Europe and worked for Allianz and Zurich Insurance, two big carriers in the past in Europe, and then relocated to the States and started working at Farmers. I came actually from the business side as a business process engineer, and then on the tech side, program management, and then eventually chief of staff and CIO, and then CDO, and then shifted over to Liberty Mutual and was global CDO there as well for the global risk solutions. So it was a bit of it wasn't a straight line. I did a lot of movement from business to tech and within tech, and then to data.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. And, having worked for some of the largest global insurance companies, maybe give us a high level of what are some of the key lessons you learned working on the data side of things and AI in these complex enterprise environments.
Yeah, well, one thing that people need to think about when it comes to insurance is that insurance is nothing else but a data company. Everything they do is based on data they can gather to assess a risk and create a price for a claim that is somewhere in the future. So, I think the DNA of an insurance company is very much tied to good data and data that they can use for the actuary and the product development. And then, nothing in the economy actually works without an insurance. You can't drive a car, you can't fly a plane, you can't start a train, you can't, build a house, you can't employ people. So insurance is really across the board necessary in our economy, and it is a very data heavy industry. But it's also an old industry. Insurance companies are, over 100 years old, and some of their systems might not be quite that old, but some of their systems are very old, and you still have mainframe and many legacy systems. And then in addition to that, there was a time, I think 2005, 2006, 7, at least in Europe, where there was a lot of acquisition. So many insurance companies bought other insurance companies. So you had this phenomenon of bringing different systems together under one umbrella, and many of them did not take the time or have that vision of modernizing and standardizing and going to one platform. So if you look at the architecture of some of the bigger insurance companies, especially those that have grown through acquisition, it is everything under the sun. Many hundreds of systems, hundreds of applications across the value chain. So that obviously introduces complexity. It introduces data that flows from its source to its destination through many different pipes, and they all manipulate the data. So there's a lot you can do.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Insurance is the original sort of data application, actuarial science, actually one of the first applications of taking
Yeah,
data and actually building a business on top of that or a product on top of that,
yeah,
right? And you're right, data variety is a big challenge in large enterprises. It's often hard to appreciate if you have not been in one of these big enterprises with that much history. Every merger acquisition creates new silos, right? So one of the things that is great about your background is you've been able to actually accelerate the pace of innovation in some of the places that you've been. Tell us a little bit about, on one hand, you have all this complexity and silos, yet you're moving fast, and it's not easy.
Yeah, so it was a very focused attempt to say, if we want to embrace and challenge ourselves and think innovatively, we need to create a space that allows that. And so we really tried to not only create a physical space, but also a technological space where you can experiment with emerging technology, where you can do fast prototyping, and where you can build without all of the legacy tie-ins that might slow you down. So that was an environment that we created because we needed to be separate from the mothership, to that monolithic sort of environment, to be able to move fast. But once you can prove out that certain innovative products work, you need to be able to show that it can scale. And then it can scale in parallel or even embedded in the existing environment. And that's the hard part, because that's really when it gets complex and might cost a lot of money. So you need to know what is it worth it? Can you get your ROI to work? But you will never know if you don't have a space where you can experiment. And if you already know all the problems that are going to come and all the things that you know because you've been working in this legacy environment, you need to get rid of that to be able to think creatively and innovatively and come up with something that is truly new.
Yeah, I think that's great advice in terms of moving fast and managing the different aspects of that. Can you maybe share a little bit about this innovation lab that you created at Farmers?
Yeah.
Maybe share some examples of how you guys were able to drive, or specific innovations you're able to bring
Yeah,
about?
so we had a small but very powerful team that focused on creating this innovation lab. As I said, it was a physical space that we
Hmm.
ripped everything out that looked old, and we created a very modern environment with the newest technology. And that attracted the right talent. So when people came to interview for this team, they saw an environment that was more along those lines that they were hoping for than the cubicle space. So to attract talent, you need to create an environment in which they want to thrive. Um, and then I'll give you an example, right? How we did it. So we were experimenting with emerging technology at the time. Obviously, one of them was virtual reality and augmented reality, which now is no longer so emerging, but at the time it was new. And no one really could think about, well, how are we going to use that in insurance? Um, but we said, let's first see what it can do, and then maybe we can solve a problem that no one thought of was solvable with a new technology. So, just like Henry Ford always said, if I ask people what they want, they'll say faster horses, but they'll never think of a car because it's just not something that they can imagine. And so we experimented with that, and we realized that there was a use case for it, which was training. We know that there actually is a university of farmers, like in the commercials, and claims adjusters get trained there, and they get trained on real live claims and losses. So broken cars, or water damage in a house. And so there's only so many hours they can spend learning these, and then they go out on the job and they learn on the job. So what we did was we created a virtual house with, I think, 16,000 different water damages. And with the virtual reality goggles and the remotes, they were able to go through this house and kneel down and open a cupboard and look inside and see if there's mold. And they could really practice a lot more scenarios than they ever would in a non-virtual world. So from a training perspective, there were two big advantages. We could increase the number of training material significantly. We were able to gamify it a little bit to keep people interested. And it was much cheaper than flying people in. They could do this at home. You send them the gear, or you find a place where they can get the gear, and they can do this from pretty much anywhere. And then when COVID came, of course, that was a big thing, and we were ahead of the game there.
Very cool. I think looking ahead, and then comes a situation that actually, with COVID, kind of making it like you're almost ready for it, right? Given
Yeah.
the scenarios that you were in. Um, so I think one of the things that I see with this sort of concept of innovation lab is that you had also kind of actually created a physical space. It's not just
Yes.
like getting into that frame of mind of innovation. So it's
Yeah.
not just picking a few people, but the whole environment around that. Um, and you mentioned to me that these days you've also been advising sort of people who are at the leading edge of innovation in startups and venture and so on. Maybe tell us a little bit about that part as well.
Yeah, I think it's a completely different environment, right? There are very bright people that have great ideas and they come up with a concept in the fintech space. And it works for different types of potential clients. But sometimes, there is a broad spectrum of insurances. There's life insurance, health insurance, right? There's personal lines insurance, commercial insurance, and they are very, very different. And the companies that provide these products can be very, very different, right? Life insurances can be small and local and regional, and then you can have global carriers that are very, very complex and, in the top sort of Fortune 100. So what I've noticed is that sometimes these fintech companies have a very interesting product, but they do not have a go-to-market strategy for the variety of potential clients. So knowing what a big insurance carrier needs and what their priorities are and how their funding mechanism works and what their priorities are when it comes to their strategy versus a life insurance that is regional in South California or whatever are very, very different. And so helping fintechs understand the potential of their product, understanding what features are interesting for which type of audience and potential client might be different, right? So you might go to one, you might have 5 or 6 cool features within your sort of umbrella, but one is really the differentiator for this one versus the other. The common thread, though, I think, for all is right now, everybody wants to be smarter than their competitors. So data and analytics and insights that tell them something they didn't know yesterday is where you get the advantage and where you get the hook. So, that's what the decision makers want to know. They want to know something the others don't. And so insight creation with data that helps you interpret not only a dashboard but actually understand the data, understand the background, and interpret it and be able to get insights that you didn't get yesterday, will give you that competitive advantage, and that's really what I think most of them are looking for.
Hmm. And I think I've heard you talk about something called decision intelligence. Is that kind of what you're referring to
Yeah, I think that's
versus just
what I'm
dashboard?
I'm talking about, right? So decisions, I think there's a balancing act, as well, right? You need enough information to make a decision. So, but not too much either, right?
Hmm.
You need to understand before you make a decision, what are the key elements I need to know to be able to make an educated and good decision. And if I don't get those, I shouldn't make a decision. And if I get more, I should not necessarily need them for the decision. So, get as much as necessary, but actually as little as possible.
I see. That's so just being exactly zoned in on what really matters, right?
Yeah.
And when
Because
you talk,
there
yeah.
are so many opinions, and so
Mhm.
many people think you should know this before you make a decision, and you should know that before you make a decision. And it often sounds very reasonable. That's why you need to take a step back and say, for this decision, what do I really need to consider? What do I need to know? And what is sort of noise and distraction?
Okay. And understanding that we're talking a little bit in the insurance context as well, does this sort of a thing come down to just leaders, or does it come down to everybody who might just maybe a claims adjuster, or like,
I
where all
think it
should
is
this
should be a
apply?
cultural thing. It should be embedded in
Hmm.
the culture of the enterprise and the company. And everybody makes decisions. Like let's not pretend that
Yeah,
only the executives make decisions. They make maybe much fewer decisions than the others, but maybe a little more important or a little more impactful decisions. but everybody makes decisions in their daily job all the time. And I think understanding how much do I need to know to make decisions smart and secure is applicable to any role.
Got it. And could you share maybe an example for me to like grok on this is like applying this sort of approach? Have you seen that sort of create, let's say in insurance space itself, like, better policy structures or targeting the right sort of audience or market or having the right pricing or, stuff like that? Where does it create some competitive advantage, or where have you seen that create competitive advantage?
I think an example that doesn't necessarily only apply to insurance is
Mm-hmm.
actually when you are talking about your strategy. So if you have if you have a north star, that you have a vision that you want to work towards, you need to take actions to get there, right? It's not a leap. That means every day you need to try to make progress, and these are the little decisions that you need to make almost incrementally to get towards your north star. And the path won't always be a straight line. So I think, having that vision and that North Star as an orientation, but knowing that the path is not as clear as you might think, will require you to make decisions on the fly sometimes on a regular basis. And you need to know, okay, what really matters to get to that point? Sometimes there is so much information that you forget about your goal and that you start drifting off the path, because that also makes sense. And I like this term that says, sometimes we leave good ideas behind, and that means there are often very good ideas that we should not do because they are right now not helping us to stay on track towards our goal. And those can cost money, and they can cost time, and they can often be a distraction and slow you down.
Yeah, makes sense. Um, as we're talking about this, it's, I think, of course, essential to talk about AI as well, right? And you were in a global CDO role at Liberty Mutual, right at as the thick of AI, Gen AI had started to come in, right? So, and you've driven a lot of innovation there on that front. Maybe, give us a little bit of perspective of how does Gen AI apply within the domain itself, and we can get into
Yeah,
broader areas of that.
I think every CEO and every leader is talking about AI, and they want to know what the others are doing, and are we falling behind, or are we also doing our fair share to stay with the pack, or and so there's a lot of buzz around it. But I think there are also different topics that get commingled, right? AI, Gen AI, and agentic AI are all a little
Hmm.
different. So you need to understand a little bit what the differences are to be able to make educated decisions on your AI strategy. And my point there is, AI strategy on its own, I don't think makes much sense. If you have an AI strategy, what I would mean by that is a plan to activate AI throughout the enterprise that supports and accelerates your business strategy. So if your business strategy is we want to become more profitable, and you've identified that within the value chain of your process, these are the three elements that really make a difference when it comes to profitability. So let's say pricing, or marketing, or claims handling. Well, pricing is an obvious one. Then that is where you should focus to activate AI to make sure that the piece that helps you achieve your goal is what you are supporting. Now, of course, there's often things like, oh, we could automate this and automate that. But sometimes they don't really, those use cases are interesting, and they could be seen as POCs and pilots that help you learn. But if you really want to make a difference, you need to scale in those pieces of the value chain where you want to achieve your strategy, right? So if it's profitability, let's say pricing or underwriting might be the key elements. That's where you need to really scale the AI capabilities, and maybe not so much in accounts payable or billing, right? Where you could do it as well, but they're not the differentiator, and they're not necessarily supporting you in getting more profitable. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I mean, basically aligning your AI strategy to your business strategy, and instead of going in all different directions and doing things which may not necessarily align with the what makes your business succeed, essentially, right? Or
Yeah.
differentiate.
I
Um,
yeah, I think again, both technology and data strategies are intertwined, and they both need
Hmm.
to support the business strategy. The business strategy needs to be clear, and then you can identify which capabilities does the business need and how can I accelerate them with AI use cases, and eventually where can I scale. I think that's really what many are struggling with is they have many use cases and they've done POCs and they have 15 different AI agents running around within their process, but are they really scalable to a degree that you see it in the top or bottom line? In the end, that's what it comes down to. If I can't see the impact on the top or bottom line, then I haven't been able to scale it.
Yeah, it's a difference in a cool idea and what actually impacts the business, right?
Yep.
Um, so actually, on that front, you're executing your AI strategy. You're looking at the business strategy. We did talk about earlier how in the world of insurance specifically, the data environment can be extremely complicated, right? Um, how is that playing a role in taking some of these use cases to production, assuming it's aligned to business strategy? What else are the challenges coming in front?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is always is data governance, and what I mean by that is
Hmm.
almost more data quality and reliability, or the veracity of the data. Can I really use it? You can have as much data as you want. If the people don't trust it and don't use it, it's worthless. So that I think is the biggest challenge: is to have the right data at adhering to the right quality standards at the fingertips of those users who want to use it on a daily basis and trust it. So, when I talk about data governance and the quality, I mean, you need to decide what is important. Is it important that the number is accurate? Let's say it's a number, right? Let's say social security numbers, right? Do they need to be accurate or not? Do they need to be timely? Let's say phone numbers could be old or new. Is timeliness important? Is the quality, is the completeness important, right? So there are many different dimensions of data that you need to decide on which ones are the most important so that I can say this data is good and you can trust it. Because there's always the feedback that then comes, yeah, it's accurate, but it's old. Or, half of it is empty. Or, there are 4 zeros for a zip code. That can't be true, right? Or everybody 20% of our clients seem to have their birthday on the 1st of January 1999 because it's easy to type and people just put something in. So it's not true, but it's complete, it's accurate. I mean, it's theoretically accurate, right? 1st of January is a date and it's timely, but it's still not something you will use or trust. So that really, I think, is the biggest challenge in this overflow of data, is to be able to say which pieces of data do I need and can I use and trust, and those are the ones that we really want to make sure are available.
True. I mean, I think governance tends to be one of the more complex areas,
Yeah.
especially in the kind of data environments we're talking about, legacy systems, mergers across multiple companies, and hence multiple systems, right? Many copies of data and so on. Is there
Yeah.
something that you were able to identify strategies that we can learn from?
Yeah, I think at before that at Farmers, we did a migration from our on-prem data
Hmm.
sort of environment to Snowflake in the cloud and on AWS. And we used that migration to make sure we set up an architecture and a governance model that helps us provide data in a way that is more reliable, takes less, less time to massage and fix. And that really means you have to go back to all the way upstream to your, system of records, transactional data, and all kinds of different sort of flavors of data, and determine with the business, how do we want this to be? And sometimes they don't agree, right? The actuaries and the underwriters have a different understanding of the same data element. And then sometimes you have to say, oh, well, if you're not talking about the same, then maybe it isn't the same, and we need to create two values, one for you that you use and one for you that you use. And it's both coming from whatever source we might have, but we need to agree on the terms and create that. So those are good opportunities to take a look at what you have and how you can make it more usable. in the end.
It's a great way to look at it. One of the things as I'm thinking about AI specifically, and is my experience kind of working with some of our customers in insurance has been that there's a new variety of data that can be leveraged that was harder to leverage earlier, looking through documents or being able to query documents along with data. More recently I've seen images and also videos, so it could be images
Yep.
of a
Yep.
inspection or videos and so on.
Yep.
How
Yep.
is that changing the
Oh, I
the
think that
landscape?
is already largely implemented,
Hmm.
or being used already. So in the claims process, people take videos of the damage instead of pictures, and they can send it in. Or some documents are handwritten, or and we used to use OCR, but now we can use AI and go much faster about it, more accurately. And you have all this unstructured data that we have, that can now much more efficiently be analyzed and transformed into structured data that we can use. So that is already happening, I think, in many places. Calls are being recorded and analyzed, videos are being taken, photos. It goes so far that now we have AI created photos that we think are fraud. So you can create such great images today of a damaged car, but it's actually not damaged, and they send them in. So now there's already sort of that counter action that you need to take is, are these AI generated pictures that we use for our claims assessment, and how do we catch that now?
Oh wow, yeah. It's a benefit, but it's also a security
Yep.
challenge then, right? Um, I think, broadly when I'd seen, my understanding of the industry, insurance being both regulated and also, many of the companies being big, with, very secure businesses, that the pace of innovation, if we go back to like 5, 10 years ago in the industry wasn't, that high. But it seems like, would you correctly say that, or am I correct in thinking that insurance has become one of the fast innovators in the post sort of AI, Gen AI space right now?
I would not say the insurance industry is extremely fast at anything, but that's not because, they wouldn't want to be. It truly is because of the history and the sins of the past and the regulatory environment. I mean, every
Hmm.
state is different in the US. Every country, every continent has own regulations, and it's very hard to move fast when you have to jump through so many hoops. But I think that AI and Gen AI or agentic AI are just so obviously helpful within the insurance industry. And there are some that have been really investing billions of dollars in this space, that it has created a sense of urgency across the board. I think most insurance companies know, if we do not get on this train, we will not be here in a couple years, right? Because it will be a game changer. And I think, in insurance industry in general, yes, there's a lot we can do with AI, but I think in general, the way we work will change significantly with AI across the board, not only in the insurance industry. But if you miss that boat, you will potentially fall behind the pack, and then eventually be irrelevant.
Yeah, and I think, talking about work being done in an industry, and one of the things you mentioned earlier was that you used AR technology to train people virtually in ways that was at least not possible at the time, and that became an advantage later on. So as you're thinking about sort of AI coming into work within the industry, again, thinking ahead how things might change, what are some of the interesting things or the cool things that you have seen in work being done?
Well, I think we touched on it briefly. I don't know if it's cool, but it's definitely something I've seen, is using AI to read unstructured data or to interpret unstructured data that comes in all kinds of shapes and forms and formats. That is definitely already happening. I think that within the sort of broader catastrophe space, when we're trying to analyze, where's the next fire going to be in California, or where's the next hailstorm, and other sort of more broad catastrophes, using third party data that you can buy from across the board and a good model, you might be able to predict more accurately. And that's what insurance is trying to do, is try to predict the risk. And the more accurate you can do that with a good model, using trends, and instead of looking only backwards, which we used to do for the most part, we look at claims for the last 50 years and try to determine what's going to happen next. I think it's changed so much that we need to leverage it to be able to predict more accurately how we see the risk landscape changing.
From being inside the industry to now being outside and sort of helping founders, boards, and figure out how to take their innovation into back into the industry. You're getting a bit of an outside view, right?
Yeah.
I'm curious how um, maybe it's giving you a different perspective, and how is that helping you advise folks who are getting in, because you were an innovator and a leader, but it's a lot harder when on the other side you're going to somebody who may not be in the same frame, right?
Yeah, I think I try to I think people are scared of the complexity and the slowness and the reputation that the insurance industry has, right? I mean, it seems to have a bad rep, even worse than banks, it seems, right? Because people interact with their bank much more frequently, so they feel more comfortable with it. But with insurance, sometimes you don't interact with it for years, so you don't really know how it works. I think that is what I try to really advise people on, is how can you understand an insurance carrier and the industry without all the perceptions that you might have as a personal user of insurance. And it's all manageable. I think if you explain to people what the significance is of an insurance and what they do, then you will know that data is important. At the same time, yes, they have grown through acquisitions over many, many years, so that's a problem. Yes, they are heavily regulated and they're different across the board. Yes, that's a problem, but it's all solvable. So I think the advisory piece that I bring to my current clients is more about um, helping them see the art of the possible in an industry that seems a little scary.
Yeah, you're very right that most of us do not maybe understand how insurance works on the inside. Yeah. And it's complex data decisions that are happening there, but yeah, we don't often end up interacting. It's almost like if you think about, very few people understand how credit scores work. This is kind of another order of magnitude complexity, because you don't even get to deal with that, right,
Yep.
often.
Yep.
Yeah. um cool. I mean, one thing I want to go back to is sort of um people who are building careers in data, and while you're advising like founders, CEOs, and boards, how would you share some advice to people who are building the career in data, and especially given that you've had several lateral moves in your background as well?
Yeah. So this is a topic that I have been sharing regularly with people that are trying to grow their career, or new to the work environment. It's push yourself out of your comfort zone, try new things, and lateral movement. That is one of, I think people underestimate what lateral movement can open up for you. People are very focused on moving upwards vertically, and there's only so many jobs up there and ahead of you. But if you move side to side, suddenly there are 5 jobs that you could potentially do, and then more and more. So I think the lateral movement is sometimes frowned upon, but I think it is actually a career accelerator, because suddenly you're the guy that can do this and that and that. And you're no longer focused only on one area. And especially if you are thinking of being a successor to your leader. Your leader manages 6 people, and if you can do 4 of the things that those 6 people then, or you have experience with 4 of those areas out of the 6, you have an advantage to those that only have done 1 or 2. So lateral movement, pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, and the last one is um, volunteer for the work no one wants to do. And I've said this also to my kids. Someone needs this to get done, and no one wants to do it. So the advantage there is that you probably have more autonomy than normal to just get stuff done. That means you can try things out, you can do it your way, you can, be more efficient and effective because you don't have as much red tape maybe to jump over. But at the same time, you can build a reputation of being the person to go to when you need to get something done, or when there's a little bit more urgency, or maybe even a bit of a fire drill, right? It's all I remember in my career when we had fire drills, it was always the same group of people that we would call together because we knew if we get these 10 people in a room, they will figure it out, they will make it happen, and they have a reputation of doing the stuff no one else wants to do, and they've been successful at it. So those would be the three things: push yourself out of your comfort zone, keep your eyes open for lateral movement because that broadens your potential, and don't shy away from the uncomfortable tasks.
Yeah, and I think this is great advice at a time when a lot of people, including, kids and people who are early in their career and like all across are thinking, how is AI going to impact my job?
Yeah.
And I would say that being the person who can take somebody's problem and say, you know what, I can get this problem solved for you, and don't worry about that, and take that one thing off the plate, I think is a great place to be. And that sort of agency and initiative and getting stuff done is will always be needed. In what shape or form we don't know, but that's a human element that I think will always get valued. So
Yeah.
very right on. When you talk about lateral moves, help me understand, but are you basically saying that, hey, you may be in customer support and you're seeing a lot of customer questions and issues, and then your lateral move might be like, hey, I'm going to become a product manager, let's say, because I really understand what customers ask about, what issues they're facing, and I sort of have built that empathy for them, and I can translate that as a product manager into somebody that defines what the product should do.
Yes,
Is
I
that a
think,
good way to think
that's a
about
good
that?
example, but there's also examples of, just even within your immediate environment, right? So
Hmm.
maybe you've been an application developer for, the sales tool. Maybe you should switch and try and understand the underwriting tool so that you get pieces of the value chain. Or, yes, that's a great example. You've been working in the customer service space. You know what the customers are dealing with. Come and help us create the products that are better. And sometimes what I mean by lateral is you're not going to make more money, maybe even less in some cases, and you're not going to be higher up in the hierarchy. You're moving laterally, and rotating maybe even through roles, but then you have a much bigger arsenal of knowledge that will help you then take up one or the other job that might eventually open up.
Yeah, yeah, and I think this again maybe goes to thinking that um, basically the more places you sort of work, the more context you create, more places you're able to connect the dots together and
Yeah.
sort of become more valuable. I guess.
Yes, I think,
Yeah.
I've had discussions with friends that are, very focused on being a specialist, and then I'm more focused, and I think being a generalist is better. Now, there are pros and cons to both. I think you will always have your specialty. And if you want to be great at something, it's going to be something where you naturally are gifted. So, if you are not good at doing presentations, you're never going to be great at it, but you can get better at it. But if you're really good at coming up with, innovative products, that's where you can be great. So you should have your specialty and your strengths, and you should focus on your strengths to make sure that's where you can become great. But if you have other tools in your arsenal, it just broadens your potential. And yeah, I tend, and my career has been impacted by being more of a generalist and being able to help out in many different areas rather than having, only one specialty that goes very, very deep.
And on the question of career advice, I think one of the questions I've heard from some of the CDOs that I've spoken to is, the CDO has been a critical role, I'd say, and that has grown in the past, 5 to 10 years or so. But with AI becoming so front and center, and data, of course, being a core part of AI, how should CDOs think about their career? Like, how do they get to play that role in AI where it may not be just up for grabs for them?
I think there will be different types of future CDO roles, and I
Hmm.
think it will have a lot to do with what the person in role is capable of, right? I mean, in the end, it's only a title. but are you really focused on data? Are you someone that can do data and AI and analytics? Are you more of a tech guy or more of a business guy? So I think titles will sound similar. It will be CDO, CDAO, or whatever. But the actual role will be impacted by what what can you do? And that's where I come back to the more skills you have, the more you can take on and impact and have impact on your work.
Yeah, yeah, I think very true. And CDOs traditionally um, have been successful not just because they know the data, but because they also understand how the business works and how it operates and
Yeah,
be able to connect the dots there, right? And
yeah,
I think that again becomes, in my mind, like a critical part of AI as well, because AI can do a lot of things for you. You not have to write code, I guess, right? You
yeah,
can tell it to do that, but what code are you trying to write, and what is the outcome you're driving, and are you able to leverage AI yourself and in your org to get to those outcomes? I think
yeah.
becomes the critical part, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
in that role, in that sense, I think AI as a tool is gonna change the way we work on a daily basis, right? I remember when the computer came out, people had to switch and they didn't know what this computer, they couldn't even imagine what a computer could do. And then, the internet and email came and people had no idea what that could actually do. Same thing with the smartphone and same thing with the AI. I think we don't even know exactly how it's going to impact our lives, both professionally and personally. So I'm not even going to try and predict that. But it's going to have a huge impact. It's going to change the way we work. And so the more you can use it, and you'll see it, the next generation, they already use it. They're going
yeah.
to come to work and they're going to be disappointed if a company doesn't offer them the tools that they have on their phone at home. And if there's no, AI tool that they can use to generate whatever work output they need, they're going to be like, this is antiquated because they're already used to it. So that is going to definitely change and be an accelerator. But I think it's going to create a lot of new jobs. I think it's going to make the work we do easier and help us focus on the things that really only a human in the loop can do. And that means create focus, which means create more efficiency. And hopefully I don't have to do all the stuff I don't like doing anymore. And I can focus on the things that I really have fun with, because AI can take care of the rest.
Oh, very well said, right? And I think I was having this conversation just earlier today about, there are cases where people are able to use AI as a thought partner, as an assistant,
Yeah,
be able to get their work done better. Also, some topics about use AI or prompt AI to challenge you, and
yeah,
rather than just ask it stuff, because these models are trained to please you, and so you have to
yeah,
force them
definitely.
to
Yeah,
do that.
yeah,
But then you can get a counterpoint, and you just operate better if you
yeah,
leverage it the right way. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So before we wrap up, I would love to maybe hear from you, like, what are one or two AI tools that you've been using, enjoying, maybe share that with us, or maybe learning resources as well.
Yeah, well, I've actually tried to compare them. So
Hmm.
Perplexity, ChatGPT, and a couple others. I Gemini, I try to see which one works best for what prompt. And so I feel like Grok has some, I think they all have different strengths. So I'm trying to figure out, okay, for this stuff, I'd rather use ChatGPT. For this, I'd rather use Perplexity. And so those are the tools that I'm experimenting with, and my kids as well. And we've identified that some are better for certain things and others are better for other stuff. When it comes to accuracy, I still prefer to double and triple check any source myself.
Yeah, that's a good reminder is not to trust, especially when I'm telling my kids, it's like, don't believe
Yeah,
what is being said there and just take it as
yeah,
on its face value. But yeah, I think this has been super exciting. Totally agree with you on some of the approaches to leveraging AI. I think it's one of those things that you can only learn by doing. It's only when you try out all these different tools that you realize where are they good at, where are they not, and you sort of start building up your own sort of way of operating in this world.
yeah,
And it may be very unique to you versus the other person, and the only way to get that is use it and try it out and
exactly.
keep up, by the way, as well.
Yep.
Yeah. Cool. It's been a pleasure talking to you, York. Truly enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for a lot of great, covering all these aspects of data, AI, and giving some really good career advice to folks who are listening. Thank you.
Anytime. Thank you. Thanks for having me.